Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I want to welcome all of you to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Marc Snider. We're having another roundtable discussion on the Fukushima disaster. We've got James Horak on the line and Aaron Moriarty. Fukushima started on March 11th, 2011 with an exceptionally powerful earthquake that hit near the northern Pacific coast of Japan called Honshu, which is the main island of Japan. Less than an hour after the earthquake, the tsunami swept over the coast and went 10 miles inland, with the result of over 20,000 people dead or missing. Fukushima Daiichi is some 250 kilometers northeast of Tokyo. It has 6 reactors, which are boiling water reactors. And there are 3 barriers that exist for the containment of the radiation on these reactors. It's the zirconium alloy around the fuel rods, the steel barrier of the nuclear reactor, and the concrete building which surrounds these reactors. All 3 barriers for containment were breached in 3 of the nuclear reactors at Fukushima. And currently, since 2011, there has been a core meltdown in all 3 of these reactors. So let me play our first clip and we can understand a little bit better what happened in Fukushima.
Friday, March the 11th, at 2:46 p.m., an exceptionally powerful earthquake hit the Pacific coast of Honshu, the main island of Japan. At 3:36 p.m., less than an hour after the earthquake, a tsunami swept over the coast. The waves went all the way up to 10 kilometers inland. Result, over 20,000 people dead or missing, destroyed towns, ports and land devastated. Nuclear power plants were also affected, one in particular, namely the Fukushima Daiichi. Fukushima Daiichi is 250 kilometers northeast of Tokyo. The nuclear power plant has 6 reactors, each reactor successively commissioned during the 1970s. Units 1, 2, and 3 were operating at full power. The core in Unit 4 was unloaded. Units 5 and 6 were in cold shutdown. Fukushima reactors have a different technology than the pressurized water reactors built by the French operator EDF. They are boiling water reactors called BWRs. We say reactor because the heat in the core is produced by fission reactions. Boiling water because the water that removes the heat from the core turns into steam, and the steam goes directly to the turbine. The turbine drives the generator that produces electricity. Afterwards, the steam is condensed with the help of a seawater cooling system and returns to the core.
So what happened here is that after the earthquake, the power was shut down on the plant. Now, these nuclear reactors have independent generators which kicked on. So the cooling systems on the nuclear reactors started back up after the initial earthquake, and everything was working fairly well then. Then we had the tidal wave, the tsunami, after the earthquake. The tsunami is what wiped out the generators. So then the cores on all 3 reactors melted down because there was no cooling provided by the generators. And basically what happens then is the water in the containment vessels evaporated because these pumps that keep the coolant water flowing were disabled by the tsunami. The nuclear fuel became uncovered and it heated up to about 2,300 degrees Celsius. The nuclear fuel melted down and mixed with the materials in the containment vessel. And this melted core formed a magma called Corium, which flowed down to the bottom of the reactor vessel. This Corium burned a hole in the metal of the bottom of the reactor vessel and seep down into the concrete containment area around the reactors. So what we've been experiencing for the past 3 years is the radiation release from these 3 reactors. So let's pick up here, I think, on clip number 2.
Boiling water reactor has only one single system combining feed water and steam. The core is composed of fuel assemblies containing uranium. It is controlled by control rods introduced from the bottom that can stop the fission reactions in case of an emergency. Fission of uranium nuclei produces radioactive atoms that in turn produce heat, and this continues to occur even after reactor shutdown. This is called residual heat. Keeping the fuel confined and cooled is a major safety issue. The fuel is isolated from the environment by different containment barriers, just like the famous Russian dolls. A first barrier, the fuel cladding of zirconium alloy. A second barrier, the steel reactor vessel in combination with steam and water cooling systems. Finally, the third barrier, the containment building in concrete with a leak-tight steel liner. The fuel is kept under water in the reactor as well as in the adjacent pool where the spent fuel is unloaded. The pool is located at the top of the reactor vessel to facilitate the transfer of fuel underwater. When the earthquake hit the coast, seismic sensors triggered the insertion of control rods. Although fission reactions stopped, the residual heat had to be removed. The off-site power supply was lost, and the emergency diesel generators took over automatically. They supply electricity to the backup systems needed for core cooling. In reactors 2 and 3, it is a turbopump. The steam generated by the reactor operates the turbopump, which feeds water into the reactor vessel.
Okay, let's move on to clip 3.
The steam is condensed in the wet well suppression pool within the containment. In reactor 1, there was no turbopump, but a heat exchanger, which condensed steam from the reactor vessel. The condensed water was reintroduced into the reactor vessel by gravity. This heat exchanger provided core cooling by natural convection for more than 10 hours. Until then, everything seemed under control. However, reactor 1, due to excessive cooling, forced the operators to temporarily isolate the heat exchanger in compliance with operating procedures. The tsunami wave arrived less than an hour after the earthquake. The waves went over the seawall, flooding the lower parts of buildings and disabled the emergency diesel generators. On reactor 1, the operator was unable to reactivate the heat exchanger. The core was no longer cooled. It would be the first to melt. On units 2 and 3, the batteries were still operational. They operated some of the valves. The turbine-driven pumps ran for nearly 24 hours and then stopped. The cores were no longer cooled. The meltdown scenario is almost the same in all 3 reactors, only the dates change. The water in the reactor vessel evaporated. The fuel became uncovered. Heated up to a temperature of 2,300 degrees Celsius, the fuel melted and mixed with the materials from the structure to form a magma called corium. The corium flowed down to the bottom of the reactor vessel. According to Japanese officials, it pierced the reactor vessel before falling on the concrete base mat inside the containment. What quantity of corium fell? How deep did it erode the concrete? Did it pierce the steel liner? Even today, it is not possible to learn more about the state of the corium in the 3 reactors.
So what's been happening since 2011 is many tons of contaminated groundwater has been leaking into the ocean, And something like 300 tons of water every day is being poured on the molten fuel in these 3 reactors. Officials have found that the groundwater is seeping into the reactor buildings, and not long ago I heard that there were 340 tons of highly contaminated water being stored in 1,000 tanks in Fukushima. However, I think today it's closer to 1 million tons of highly contaminated water is stored in some 2,000 of these tanks. 400 tons of contaminated groundwater is being pumped out of the ground every day from around the plants, and some are predicting that in 6 years we will have widespread contamination in the Pacific Ocean.
Plants have been struggling to deal with contaminated water elsewhere on site. They're trying to stop hundreds of tons of tainted groundwater from flowing directly into the ocean every day. They say radioactive strontium and cesium may have been leaking into the ocean since May 2011. Top officials say 30 trillion becquerels of the radioactive materials may have flowed down to the shore in that time. That's well beyond the in-house annual emission limit of 220 billion becquerels. Cesium and strontium are easily absorbed into soil, so the officials say it's hard to determine the exact amount that got out. Radioactive water has been building up every day at the plant since the accident. It's a growing problem. The short-term solution is storage. There is no long-term solution. NHK World's Noriko Okada walks us through the issue.
Workers pour 100 tons of cooling water every day into the 3 reactors where the meltdown took place. The water comes into direct contact with molten fuel and becomes highly contaminated. Company officials initially thought they would be able to reuse the contaminated water to cool the reactors. But then they discovered groundwater was seeping into the reactor buildings. They had to adapt their plan to address the 400 tons of contaminated water being pumped out every day. The company installed devices that were supposed to filter out the majority of the radioactive substances from the water. But so far, cesium is the only substance they've been able to remove. The stored water remains highly contaminated with other materials. Company officials say they are now storing some 340,000 tons of contaminated water in 1,000 tanks.
Japan has entered into a nuclear nightmare. The earthquake continued for 5 minutes when it originally hit. And the following clip is the perspective of a school teacher that was teaching a class when the original quake hit at Fukushima. My understanding is that the quake was on 9.0 on the Richter scale and was one of the most powerful earthquakes to ever hit Japan.
Japan, 1945. One bomb demonstrates the awesome power of nuclear fission. That same power is now being harnessed for peaceful purposes, but always remains potentially dangerous. 1979. An accident at 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania sends thousands fleeing. 1986. An explosion and full meltdown at Chernobyl in Ukraine causes panic across Europe. Nuclear plants worldwide were supposed to be getting safer. But in 2011, the Fukushima nuclear facility is first rocked by an earthquake. Then, a massive tsunami. Japan is about to enter another radiation nightmare, while the world is reminded of its double-edged pact with the atom. Skyscrapers shake, and buildings collapse. Disasters don't just happen. They're triggered by a chain of critical events. The Japanese Meteorological Agency measures the quake at magnitude 9.0. It's the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japan. Even though the epicenter is 130 kilometers out to sea, the first news pictures show widespread devastation throughout the north of the country. In central Tokyo, communications expert Kenichi Shimomura hurries to the Prime Minister's underground crisis center. The quake is so big, it's clear there's going to be a serious humanitarian disaster. The government hastily convenes an emergency meeting.
Because of the enormity of the disaster, my instinct was that the central government had to take its own initiative to act, rather than waiting for local governments.
5 of Japan's nuclear plants are in the disaster zone. Fukushima is the largest, providing enough energy to power every home in Tokyo. The Prime Minister's team has no direct link to the power plants. All information from the plant operator, TEPCO, filters through the government's nuclear regulator, run by Yoshinori Moriyama.
Right after the earthquake, we received news from the Fukushima nuclear plant that mains power was lost.
Fukushima is just 178 kilometers from the epicenter of the earthquake. At the first sign of tremors, the plant goes into scram mode. A controlled shutdown is underway.
Okay, it looks like our roundtable is going to start up now. I've got James Horak. There we go. James, welcome to the show, and I'll bring Aaron Morarity on the air.
Hello, Mark. This is your old pal, Aaron.
Welcome to the show, Aaron. Thanks for calling in. As you guys know, we're going to have another open roundtable on Fukushima. And James, before I called you, what I was basically going over is just the mechanics of what happened again, and just reminding people that we have 3 nuclear reactors that are in core meltdown now. That means that the zirconium alloy around the fuel rods has melted. Magma formed in the containment vessel, burned through the bottom of the steel containment vessel and into the concrete. The corium has moved into the concrete now on all 3 reactors, and they're just pouring tons of water every day into those molten cores that have melted down. They're pumping the water out into tanks that they're building as quickly as they can. And my understanding is now there's something like 2,000 tanks that contain this highly contaminated water that is currently around the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. James, is that close to your understanding?
Well, they're building tanks like they claim, then that's purely cosmetic because it's going into the ocean one way or the other, and has been. All the buildings are leaking. The tanks are leaking. They built those tanks with substandard laborers, so the wells weren't good, and it is a nightmare. The fact that they have detected tritium offshore demonstrates just how progressed it has become. And the plumes that are coming out of Building 4, this is an extinction event, just a matter of time. And nothing's been done that's remedial anyway. There has, it's genocide. No 2 ways about it.
Well, what's interesting also, from my perspective, is just how the mainstream media has not covered the event at all. And what's even more ironic and Orwellian is how the community, the world community in general, has kind of gone on with their regular business and is ignoring this whole event. Aaron, do you have any observations that you'd like to share with us at all about this whole thing?
Oh, yes, it's extremely deeply troubling. It's horrifying, and maybe the lamestream media blackout is a blessing in disguise for people to have a few years of blissful ignorance and continue their, whatever kind of existence they want to have. I know for me, myself, when I look this stuff up, I look it up on the internet and it depresses me, and I can't look at it again for a while. There's something so disturbing about it that it's really hard to, and I think the general public even more so, it's really difficult for anyone to own up to this, to how horrifying this really, really is.
James, do you think that there is any relief by moving into the southern hemisphere? I know the air tends to circulate and it tends to stay above the equator.
Just a matter of time. It doesn't matter where you go. You can go to Antarctica. You can go to the North Pole if you want. It's just a matter of time. Just think about the food supply. It's going to be dwindling. Safe food supply. That it's not safe to eat anything out of the Pacific Ocean now. Anything. And it's just a matter of time before the radiation accumulates to a point where it's in human tissue. You're already starting to have babies that are being born on the West Coast with thyroid problems. There is no gauge you can put on this to determine the extent and how quickly it's going to affect the world. But it's moving into that. They have detected that it takes 3 years for it to circulate throughout the oceans. So it's circulated throughout the oceans. And we have a matter of time before every one of us is going to start feeling the impact of this on our bodies and on our livelihood, on our health, everything else. And the worst part of this is the fact that it wasn't a natural disaster.
Well, that's an interesting angle, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that because, we had 9/11, which occurred, which everyone is much more aware of than Fukushima, and then we had 3/11, which I guess this great event occurred on the 2011 in March. I don't know what day. Was it the 11th day of March? I don't even remember. But we have these numbers that seem to be repeating, and so what's the likelihood that that's a coincidence? Can you comment, James?
Well, I think more important than the numerological aspect of this is the fact that it wasn't a 9-point earthquake, and the facts that the simple observations that you can see, like the radio station has an inside video that everyone has seen. People aren't being thrown around against walls like a 9-point would do. Buildings are not falling in surrounding areas in that prefecture. So it wasn't a 9-point earthquake. So what created the tsunami? And we have rumors of an atomic bomb being exploded offshore. And sure enough, there are indications that something was going on out there. Some drilling was taking place on a ship. And the Stuxnet virus that was in the computers that were controlling the environment of those reactors, they were getting false readings because of the Stuxnet virus. This virus was engineered by Israel and the United States to mess with Iran's nuclear industry. So it's not just a case of the chickens coming home to roost with the people that convolute technology to the point where these things are committable, but it's a matter that it was designed to occur. And I'm certain that if you checked investment portfolios that were enhanced tremendously by this, that you'll find there were people that were prepared to take advantage of it on the stock markets. It's just, it's an engineered event, and there's little doubt that it's been allowed to go as far as it has, but it's like Kevin Blanch says, it was core meltdown in 3 reactors from day one.
Aaron, I'd like to get some of your thoughts on the whole possibility that this was a contrived event and not just a nuclear accident.
Well, I think there is some interesting evidence pointing to that, and of course Benjamin Fulford is the sort of the proprietor of this concept, and he's been advocating this. He's got financial connections in that area. I don't know what to think of Benjamin Fulford. He sounds convincing. One time I saw an interview with him with a whole panel of some of these people. It looked kind of like a pro wrestling meeting from the 70s. I'm not sure how much stock I would put in his... I'm just not sure. I'm kind of 50-50 on his information. It is possible, I can see if maniacal, power-hungry governments want to attack countries and try to force them into monetary systems, they could use weather. They could take a bomb and put it offshore to trigger a tsunami. It might not always work, but it might. It's a definite possibility, but I think let's take a step way back and take a look at the idiot decision that human beings have made to even make these power plants and to put them all over the world, and all of them are ticking time bombs. We don't know when they're going to melt down, but they probably all will at some point. If our power grid goes down for more than a week, we're going to have meltdowns at all of our nuclear power plants. This is just something we can never. Human beings can never conquer nature. You can never. Well, we'll have this safeguard. No, you can't, because nature is too big.
James, what do you think? Can nuclear power be safe?
That's a question that is so conditional, and it's like trying to catch Jell-O in your hand. The issue is this: is it feasible? Is it feasible in terms of the system that we have on this planet that is so corrupted that you can't keep standards to be followed, regulations to be observed? It's just not possible. Anywhere, people that are living anywhere in this country that have a reactor in their general vicinity that's supplying them with energy or electricity, have their own stories to tell about the information that comes out when these plants are being built, and questions about the standards and questions about bad wells on the tanks and on the different components that the structure of these reactors depend on. And they find out that they're flawed because they don't abide by the regulations. The contractors try to cut costs. It happened here near where I live at Comanche Peak. And they never corrected the problems, the issues that were raised by workers themselves that united and created something of a whistleblowing gang. And instead of correcting the problem of the bad wells that were being made, the woman that was leading this protest of workers got a posh job as an inspector, and it all went away. The corruption of the system won't allow, if it's possible for nuclear energy to be safe, the corruption in the system and the greed of contractors and companies, corporations that build these. But the worst aspect of this is still being left out, and I think your last caller, your last guest mentioned something about these being ticking time bombs. The aspect of that is that your enemy, if you have a military enemy at all that has any delivery system at all I have to do is target these reactors. I don't have to have a hydrogen bomb. A blockbuster will do it. And, we're sitting ducks with these things. And what amazes me is when the question of EMPs, the potential of EMPs came up, not anybody in the media or in the alternative media raised the question, what's going to happen to these reactors if we have an EMP? Well, your last guest insinuated what would happen. Core meltdowns. Because it takes energy to cool these cores. And another issue that's raised that people kind of sidestep, especially in the mass media, is that when you remove the fuel to reload the core with fresh fuel rods, when you do that, the spent fuel rods, which aren't really spent, they're reduced in energy, in active energy, that's all. When you remove them, they're still hot. You still have to cool them. And that's what people not getting. It's not coming across. It's the danger of building number 4.
Well, that's interesting. It leads right into my next set of clips. I don't know how you may not be able to hear these very well, James, but I'm going to play some clips. And these clips were taken from Fukushima 3 when it experienced its quote-unquote hydrogen explosion. There are different ideas on that. Some of the fuel rods, I think, were stored at the top of these buildings. And when the hydrogen gas was released, hydrogen is very explosive. When it hit the air, we had this giant explosion. And I think these fuel rods burned and exploded that were on top of these buildings. So let's listen to these clips.
And as we watch that, Marc and Rimson, what are your thoughts?
That's still speculating. One possibility of that is a hydrogen explosion. That's quite an energetic one. Or some sort of chemical explosion from they do use oil and other things within the plant. But that's a big explosion. I very strongly suspect that's not an actual nuclear explosion in the sense that nuclear materials were involved in that. The issue is that if that's damage to containment, the nuclear materials may be able to escape.
Particular reactors, not the 2 and 3, but these particular ones, have got their spent fuel rods sitting on top of the containment
No, I
vessel.
saw that in the news. They admitted that the spent fuel rods are sitting inside of the containment deal, and that's what it looked like to me shooting up in the sky.
On top of the containment vessel. In other words, when that explosion went, there was enough pressure underneath the bottom of that to shoot that containment vessel with those spent rods in it. It says right here, I've got the
Give me the headline on that because I did see that in a whole bunch of articles. It just side note mentioned that in several of the reactors sitting inside on top of the containment vessel are the spent fuel rods, and that was the fire at number 2 that actually caught it was number 4 that caught some of those on fire. Wow, again, hidden in plain view, putting our heads together, Richard. Specifically, what's the article, because I got a sea of them here, that had that about the spent fuel rods. If we just search spent fuel rods, fire, it'll show you all the articles that have it. Man.
Fuel rod fire at Fukushima reactor would be like Chernobyl on steroids. And it was
let me write it. Fuel rod
fire
at
Fukushima reactor would be like Chernobyl on steroids. And it was written by Kirk James Murphy, who is an MD. He's a doctor.
And what do we repost that from? What's the original source?
front page of Infowars.com, and it is one of the highlighted articles down there that, if you click on it, the original source was FDL, whatever that is.
I see it. I'm going to get Watson on this. This is hidden in plain view. We're more than 24 hours out of Fukushima 3 blowing. So that Mark 1.
So I wanted to hear from Aaron. Aaron, do you have any thoughts on these hydrogen explosions?
Oh, it's horrifying, and you're right. There were those fuel rods were stored on top of these buildings that blew up, and who knows where all the material scattered to. It's just a horrifying nightmare. It's beyond. And you know, Mark, I got to tell you, a couple days ago I did look this up, and some of the latest YouTube videos I saw from newscasts were that the material has now burned through the bottom of the building, I think Reactor 3, and it has gone down into the ground, and it's reached the groundwater, and the steam coming up, the radioactive steam that's coming up, has a new radioactive element, strontium something or other. I don't know what number it is, but some other even more deadly, now that it's gone into the earth. It's pretty sad.
James, what do you think of these hydrogen explosions? And go ahead and comment on this, the corium getting down to the groundwater.
Well, there's no containment. The cooling water that they're using on the cores, they claim to be putting in tanks, but the structures themselves are leaking. So it's going in as much as going into the ocean as it's going into these tanks, because they don't have it contained at all. They may be pumping some of the water out of the structures back into tanks, but most of it's like trying to catch water out of the side. You can't do it. And one of the things that I'd like to explain is that after this debacle off of South Carolina, where we have reason to believe they were going to create the worst false flag of all and drop some nuclear warheads on Charleston, South Carolina. There were explosions, detonations in the ocean off of South Carolina. And seismologists finally admitted, that these weren't earthquakes, that they can read a seismic disturbance. And it has, earthquake starts out slow and builds. A nuclear detonation, the maximum reading that they get is at the very start. And that's what they got there, and that's what they got at Fukushima. So, we were never told about that until this last event off South Carolina, where seismologists stepped up to the plate finally. Well, I said all along, seismologists can determine what happened in 911 if there were nukes involved. They can determine, and there were nukes involved in 911. There was even a plume that went up into the ionosphere, the magnetosphere. It only happens when you have an atomic bomb. And you had the same thing at Fukushima. That wasn't hydrogen gas. That was a nuke inside building number 3.
So you're saying that I don't think you're saying that all of these were nukes, but you think there was a nuke that went off in... That's pretty phenomenal. And the other thing about this whole thing that is so strange and so bizarre is still, most of the public is asleep and not even thinking about this or not even aware. And I'd like for you to comment on that, James.
Oh, it's the media. You have 50 years of imprinting, a pattern of imprinting with the media in the United States, and it goes like this. If you come out with a fantastic story like Fukushima or like anything that happens that is just revelatory, I mean, changes everything, it comes out, let's say, at on the 5 o'clock news. People hear it. If it's not reinforced over the next days, doesn't appear on that 9 o'clock news, 10 o'clock news, et cetera, enough, it won't be taken in. It's real. They know that, they use that, they manipulate that, and then they can say, well, we reported it. Yeah, sure. You didn't do it convincingly. So the sleep consciousness of people today that depend on repetition and depend on how the media reacts with this is just another form of mind control. The media, ever since ad agencies got involved in politics, the media itself has been more of an opinion former in the way that it produces news, the way that it reveals the news, than the news itself. And they have a sleeping giant. They have committed the American consciousness and the English consciousness to that of a sleeping giant. And then, like I've said before, it will take 2 days without food for people to figure out what the alternative media and people like you and me have been trying to tell them all along. And then they'll say, well, wow, maybe those people are right.
You know, I had the most interesting discussion with a family member over Christmas about 9/11, and it's just really interesting. The mainstream hasn't woken up yet, but I think you're right. A couple days without food will probably do it, James.
Yeah, it'll wake them up. One of the things that I'd like to point out is how they change definitions as time goes on. They made a big mistake with 911 because what did they call the site where those buildings fell? They call it ground zero. And so if you looked in your dictionaries at that time and Wikipedia and everything, you would find ground zero. What is ground zero? Ground zero is the point where a nuclear detonation takes place.
Wow.
Now they've changed that, but they let the cat out of the bag for anybody that knows what that means. So they just changed the definitions. But, again, seismologists know. Seismologists know whether a nuke occurred at 911.
Wow.
I know.
Well, we've got another caller. Someone from the chat room has called in. This is RD47. And I think he's got some news. It's maybe not exactly about Fukushima, but it seemed pretty interesting, so I wanted to bring him on here. RD, go ahead. You're on the air.
I've been the last 3 nights, again last night, I've been recording the moon. Now, the moon, instead of like when you have partial moons, you have it on the sides. But what we're having right now is the top half of the moon is being chopped off by a shadow from something. Now, nobody seems to know what this shadow is or why this is happening. I posted my first video on Godlike Productions, the biggest conspiracy site, I think, or second, and I had over 3,000 hits from astronomers and everybody else, and nobody could explain the phenomenon. And then I just had a ton of shills trying to disprove it.
So you're actually filming the moon, and it looks like the top half is literally not visible.
It is absolutely gone. And what I'm uploading onto YouTube right now, it'll be ready in about 10 minutes. But the one I did last night is absolutely incredible. It's a crescent setting on its side.
Huh.
Yeah, let's
Could it be clouds obscuring the moon?
No. We're here in Arizona. We don't even have any chemtrails for a change, thank God. None of that. Some people said chemtrails. That was all ruled out. I had all kinds of shills trying to explain things. And then people would come back and say, hey, I've looked this up everywhere, and the moon only wanes vertical, not horizontal.
That's
There's no record.
An EMV.
James Horak has got an interesting perspective on this, so let's listen to James.
Okay. It's an EMV.
Go ahead, James. Elaborate on that.
These are in the sun. They can be any size. They farm the energy of the sun. They control all stars that are stable enough to have planets around them that are inhabitable. And they're there every day. And when Ison was coming through, you saw images of 3 EMVs in the field. Now, all of a sudden, since that is untenable to share with anyone, they've come up trying to make it out an asteroid, chunk of rock. Well, how does the 3 EMVs in a field become a chunk of rock? It doesn't. So, another lie. But what you're seeing around the moon is another sign to mankind that whatever you monsters do that are in charge of things on Earth, you're not the final say.
Well, now that's an interesting take on this, and I know you've talked about this in the past, James. Do you have anything you could kind of tell us about in terms of, I know you've talked about, I guess you call it the experiment, and if there's population control that takes place on this planet, that the EMVs will intervene, and you've had some things to say along those lines in the past.
Well, this planet is not far from being a place where no one will want to live, even the monsters. And that's what I call it. That's what they are. They have no conscience. They have set themselves apart from mankind. They're running agendas that are insane. And Fukushima is just but one of them. They don't have a behavior pattern that can be described as anything other than a pathology. So what you're seeing is, it should have been signaled by what happened and how the debacle in the Gulf of Mexico occurred and how it was handled, how it was dealt with, and the Corexit, and the fact that if people hadn't become aware of how toxic and poisonous that was, they'd have kept pumping it into the Gulf of Mexico. It'd gone around the Atlantic side, and they would have to start picking up people in Florida and taking them to FEMA camps, which they evidently planned to do because they had these UN vans, thousands of UN vans just below Fort Lauderdale at a base on the runways. What were they there for? So what we have is people wake up, they stop it. It's just like if you pull up a rock and you've got a bunch of snakes under it, they slither off. Well, these critters have been planning this sort of thing now for a number of years. And they wanted to have the New World Order fully implemented by 2000. That didn't work. So there's been one attempt at a false flag after another. And of course, if people catch them in the act, then they back down. I think that they had something planned for the Olympics in London. And a lot of other people did too. The signs were there. But it got out. People were concerned. Enough people were watching. They need the element of surprise.
I'm going to bring Eve on the line. She's got direct dealings with the public, and she wanted to comment just quickly on how apathetic the public is in general. Eve, how are you?
Hi, Mark.
Welcome to the show.
Everyone. Thank you. First, I would like to ask James a question, if I could.
Sure.
And it's about RD's video on the moon. First of all, I know this sounds ridiculous, but I don't know what an EMV is.
James, were you able to hear any of that? Could you please elaborate again on what an EMV is? Go ahead.
It's electromagnetic vehicle. That is the name that Dr. Norman Berggren gave them. And out of deference to him, I use it. That's not what I would call them. but that's the name that he designated. Then he was scientist and imagist for Ames, very well reputed, and he wrote a book on the EMVs called Rainmakers of Saturn. It was published in 1986. Didn't receive much publicity. His colleagues never challenged him or attempted to debunk him and his findings. But that was left to ufologists, because ufology is a field that's replete with the cottage industry. And that's people trying to make a living off of publishing and giving lectures and so forth. And they are short-sighted, haven't advanced the field of ufology in 50 years. And many of them are paid gatekeepers. And, I know that Mark, I know that you know that, Mark.
Yeah, it's pretty terrible.
Yeah. Well, but you brought up, I suppose, I couldn't hear you very well, but I suppose you were, the lady that called in was interested in what's on the other side of the moon now, the L-shaped ships.
Yeah.
And I can tell you about those if you want me to.
Go ahead, James. That would be great.
Everything is engineered. There's a design in the universe for everything. And you'll appreciate the concept I'm about to tell you. When your cores hit the mantle of the Earth, you will lose the moon. It can come into the Earth, or it can go out, but you'll lose it. And those ships, those craft, are there to prevent it from coming into the Earth and take it elsewhere. Of course, once you lose your moon, you're going to have an unstable Earth, like at the time when your ancestors first came to Earth from Mars. It's going to be very unstable. You'll have a great deal more volcanic activity. And the idiots that are running HAARP and other devices that cause the earthquakes and abrupt weather changes don't have to worry. Nature will take over for them. It won't be a place, though, very long where civilization can survive.
That was a huge statement. I want to make sure everyone understands that, James. You're saying when these nuclear reactors melt down, hit the mantle of the Earth, that we will lose our moon. Can you talk about that a little more?
The relationship, first of all, this has been discussed. The moon is disproportionate to what an ideal moon around the planet would be. It's too large. Has an inconstant mass. There are engines in the moon and engines on Earth to make adjustments to keep it in orbit around the Earth. And these magnetic fluctuations, gravitational fluctuations, indicate that's going on because they match each other. And when the moon drives the mantle, when that is penetrated, when the mantle is penetrated, those engines are not going to function well. And they're not going to be able to stabilize that orbit. So it's going to either come into Earth or it's going to go out. It has that tendency anyway. So,
James, there's a person in the chat room, Nat Drip, and he asks, how do you know that there are engines?
Well, one of them was discovered in the Tatra Mountains, and then there is one in the Lake Vostok that creates one hell of a magnetic anomaly, and they get pushed up by uplift and out of place, and so but there are a number of them, and they detect them. I mean, most geophysical anomaly are caused by them. But I know quite a bit about them.
So these engines, these electromagnetic engines that are positioned in key places in the Earth, they keep the moon in its correct position. And I think what you're saying is that once these core meltdowns occur in Fukushima, that is going to disrupt how these engines are working?
Oh, yes. Well, there is a harmonic balance between these engines and the mantle. They drive the mantle, and that produces a healthy atmosphere, shields around the Earth, maintains a relatively, a somewhat relatively stable gravity wave, which is something that your physicists have yet to really define well. But it's just a matter of time. They've done nothing. When they built the shield underneath the reactor at Chernobyl, that's what the concern was, because there are people that understand, know what I'm saying, know what I'm talking about. But, they don't dare breathe a word of it. Because if people really knew the risks that are run with these reactors, they would not indulge in them anymore. They would demand that they be shut down.
Does the tunneling that we hear about, the huge tunnels that they have constructed in so many places, does that fall into it at all, or any of the civilizations or other people that are living under the earth, or any of that? Can you comment on that at all?
Well, the tunnels are because that is where the elite want to take subterfuge when it hits the fan, but they don't realize how much is going to hit the fan. They're not even going to be the last to go. They'll die like rats in the hole. They have been sold a bill of goods by the people that work for them that, want to appease them and make them think that everything's okay and the job is being done and whatever. But they've been run off the moon. They've been run off Mars because they were weaponizing bases there. And now, it's underground installations, but I think they're still telling these idiots that they can get them to Mars or the moon, or look at the Bigelow and his, folly. So you got a kettle of, English say a kettle of fish, and none of it's going to hang together. None of it's is good for anybody. It's going to be mutual destruction for everyone. And the only way out of this now is to reach agreements with people from elsewhere that have tried to talk sense to them, and have tried to come to the table with them, ask them to give up the nuclear industry, ask them to give up war, to give up the methods that they employ to create famine and disease. So, what people from elsewhere ask is simply to do the right thing concerning everyone on Earth, not just a select few. And then they'll help them out of this mess. But you've gone to the point where that's the only remedy you have. It's the only remedy you have left.
James, I have another question from the chat room. Well, but Eve, I better let you wanted to comment on the general lack of concern or lack of awareness on the public, correct?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Well, I can say that when this first all happened, I was just absolutely floored. I grieved and started posting things like on Facebook about it, and no one commented it, or it just was completely avoided. And I was shocked to find out that nobody seemed to care, and I was actually deleted off of people's lists because I was bringing this up. But
wow.
The other thing, I was...
we don't know what she's talking about, do we, Marc?
People don't want to hear bad news, do they, Eve?
No.
No.
I sympathize with the lady because I've been
And
there.
I work at a parking garage here part-time, and every single shift I see 300 to 500 cars per shift. It's a lot of people. And I am the type of person that can really pick up on people's energy quite well. Mm-hmm. And I have to say that I do not see any kind of raise in awareness or in the masses of the people. And I see a very very wide selection of culture and peoples. And, anyway, that's that.
Okay. Boy, those were great comments, Eve. I have another question from the chat room, and this comes from Truth. Does James have any proof for his wild claims at all? It's almost painful to listen to him. James, can you comment?
Well, you can go to I have colleagues, and you can go to our blog and read what I've written there. But I'm not here to prove anything to you. I mean, people that prove anything don't stay very long. Gotten rid of. What I can say is that I tie loose ends together. I'm interested in resolving anomaly, and like I've always said, scientists label something they don't understand an anomaly, put it on the shelf, and forget about it. Then that's not scientific. They're not scientists. So they're, besides the fact that most of them work for companies that have contracts with the government and that are under the constraints both of compartmentalization and both security classification. And so they can't, you can't get the information you need to get an overview. And so what I'm giving you is what many of them already know. But they can't discuss because then they'll be out of work or dead. Maybe out of work and then dead. But I'll tell you this. If you do the work and you familiarize yourself with some of the things that I have put out, that people that are my colleagues have put out, if you go through and you do the work, you reach your own conclusions. I think that the understanding is that you'll will answer a lot of questions no one else will. And it's not because that I have all the information. It's that what I do know, I know firsthand.
Wow, we got to get back to that, but I do have another caller I want to bring on the air that's been waiting about almost 4 minutes now. 602, if you can state your name and then ask your question or make your comment.
My name is Wanda.
Hi, Wanda.
Hi. I do find it very strange that no one is concerned about any of this. They don't seem to be concerned at all, and this is very serious. You know what's happening in Japan.
That is so true, and I couldn't say it better myself, Wanda. James, can you comment?
Well, I agree, and that is the most alarming aspect of it. But again, what we have is that our own media has been guilty of dumbing us down. Our public school system, of course, has gone along with it as well. The kids today don't have the benefit of the practical knowledge that we obtained when we were in school, and increasingly worse. So, along with what's put in our water and our air and in our food, so you have to take in consideration that you reach a point where you're amazed there's anybody that is out of the box. But that lady is absolutely correct in being concerned. We wonder why people are not in the streets demanding something be done. Well, why aren't they in Japan? And, of course, there are people in Japan that are. There are people that are concerned. Andrew Ebbs made a number of, made 3 just excellent movies. One of them, they start off with on Fukushima Beach. And in one, he has these 3 farmers that are whose farms are near Fukushima in that prefecture. And they're talking about, you say you're decontaminating the soil. All you do is turn it over, and I'm producing food I won't eat myself. And, this food's come to the United States, by the way. So what we have is we have 10% of humanity that is capable of entertaining an awareness, and then we have 90% of humanity that is protecting its comfort zone like an ostrich hides its head in a hole.
Well, it's very interesting that you say that, James, because I had a comment in the chat room that said just that. Aloha J says a lot of people are ostriches. Either they have their head buried in their dumb phone, or if it does not affect me, I don't care. I have another caller, 505. State your name and make your comment or ask your question.
Hi, Mark. It's Judith calling.
Judith, how are you?
I'm pretty well. Just listening in, and I agree that most people just don't seem to have any interest in this whatsoever, whether they're hiding their heads in the sand or they're just basically uninformed. But I know a lot of people go to Snopes to verify things that they read on the Internet, and the entire Snopes stuff on Fukushima is debunking everything. Like, for instance, you know that map we see with the beautiful colors of purple and red and orange and yellow spreading out across the Pacific Ocean from Japan? We're all led to believe that that is the radioactivity and the flow of it to where it's going. But this article says that that is actually, well, I'll just read a little thing. It says that chart did not actually track or measure radioactive discharge emanating from Fukushima in 2013 or any other aspect of the Fukushima disaster. It was a plot created by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration immediately after the earthquake in 2011, showing the wave height of the tsunami that followed. It had and has nothing to do with the flow or spread of radioactive seepage from Fukushima. So I don't know if that's true or not.
What exactly is Snope? I've never heard of that. Snope.
Well, Snopes is just, you know what Wikipedia is? It's sort of a dictionary of modern-day things. People can go on there and submit their own definitions of things. But Snopes is more of a thing that when there are stories circulated on the Internet, Snopes digs deeper and either proves them or disproves them.
Okay, interesting. James, any comments?
Well, about that particular diagram that she's discussing, that's true. But then that doesn't tell the whole story. The whole story is, why aren't there charts? Why aren't there graphs that depict the spread of radiation by plume and what is detectable in the ocean? We have the signs there that the Pacific Ocean is becoming a death trap for most marine life. We already have the animal extinction, vast marine life extinction going on. Also, the fact that the radiation is picked up by individuals. There's the government isn't sharing anything it's finding, or any scientific institute. So why don't we? There's an absence of that information. And if you go, there are sites where readings are being taken, but they're all atmospheric. And once you have rain, that washes it out of the atmosphere. It goes down to ground and gets in the water and in the soil. Mm-hmm. So, there are a number of things that people should be aware of. Number one, most important, is that within weeks of Fukushima, the initial Fukushima event, all of the potassium iodide was taken off the shelves of pharmacies in the United States. That's diabolical, because potassium iodide is, the AEC determined in the 50s, potassium iodide was the only known treatment for radiation sickness there is. What does it do? Potassium iodide gets in the thyroid, floods the thyroid, and prevents iodine-131 from getting in there and killing the thyroid. And the thyroid commands your blood immunity. It works with the endocrine system. It works with the circulatory system. It works with the liver. It helps to maintain the hormone levels, a number of other things But without it, you don't have the blood immunity you have with it. So if you get a disease, if you contract a disease that's treated by antibiotics, the only other immunity you have is in the colon, and the first thing those antibiotics are going to do is sterilize the colon, and you are going to die because you have absolutely nothing to build immunity with or on. So you're going to die. So a case of mumps, a case of whooping cough, or anything like that's going to be fatal. So this is why that potassium iodide is so important. And so I've talked with a lot of people that believe, well, I'll use what the victims of Nagasaki and Hiroshima used, and miso soup, kelp, and so forth. Well, what people don't understand is in Japan, their food is coming from contaminated sources, and so what they're getting for their miso soup and their sea kelp, do I need to say more? And but there's never been an event like this of this magnitude before, and much less ongoing for 3 years now. So we're having isotopes created that have never been created before. And it has been, I'm sure there's some mad scientists that are just jumping up and down over the papers they're going to be able to write over this. So it is just diabolical. It's diabolical to begin with because the misinformation and not telling people go out and buy a good source of potassium iodide and give it to, take it every day, give it to your children, protect them. Not being told that. And there are people that are confusing that issue, that are just flat lying about it. But I tell people, probably the cheapest source of it is Legal Solution, and you can get it from a number of companies. Just make sure that the Legal Solution that you have contains potassium iodide, because they even have messed with that. So be advised, this will protect your thyroid, and that's very important.
I wanted to just read a few comments by Aloha J. He says, I'm taking iodine on a daily basis for about a month. Can off-the-shelf radar detectors detect the Fukushima radiation? Aloha, it'd be really interesting if you are from Hawaii to get the perspective of someone from Hawaii. So if you want to call in, that'd be great as well. Eve at the Tree of Enchantments puts a link in there that says something about Fukushima. Maybe it isn't the end of the world. Boy, I hope not, but I think we're in some serious trouble here on Earth. The truth says, despite all this, there are presently no data or scientific reports indicating that marine life along the West Coast has been impacted by radiation, and there is no reason to not continue enjoying the waves and the seafood there. I've heard of a die-off of the starfish. James,
sea lions, too.
Please elaborate on that.
Sea lions are dying. Starfish are melting. There are strange beachings. There are all kinds of stuff going on. But, of course, I think one thing on Earth that should be removed from dictionaries is proof. Because that's what these critters use. And, you don't have proof on this planet. Every theory, every principle of science or whatever, in time is disproven. Modified, changed, altered, because it doesn't fit every circumstance that can be enjoyed. So it's just a matter of time. So, these people throw proof in your face and they say, oh, well, prove it, Well, there is no certainty in a planet of lies, deceit, and corruption. Period.
Well, that's profound words indeed. And I have a couple clips from Kevin Camps, who is one of the people that I've had on the show here, and he's an outspoken person who regularly is on various radio shows. He talks about the problems with nuclear power. I'd like to actually get him back on the show. I think his organization is called Beyond Nuclear, and he's going to tell us about the International Atomic Energy Agency is actually a nuclear power promoter. So let's listen to this clip.
I'm here with you, and Kevin Camps, the radioactive waste watchdog at beyondnuclear.org, is on the line with us. Kevin, welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much, Tom.
The Nuclear Regulatory Agency of the country of Japan today, I believe, or maybe it was yesterday, raised the nuclear alert. You can tell us all what the language is, but they kicked this thing up from a 1 to a 3. What's at Fukushima? What's the significance of this? What's going on?
Yeah, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is an agency of the United Nations. Supposed nuclear safety regulator, but it's a nuclear power promoter by mandate, has this International Nuclear Event Scale, INES. It's got 7 stages on it. And this leak that just happened from these storage tanks at Fukushima Daiichi, originally the Japan Nuclear Regulation Authority was going to make it a 1, which officially is technically called an anomaly. Well, just in the last 24 hours, as you said, they're now talking a 3, which is a serious incident, and that's a 100-fold increase in severity, and that is regarded as serious. And 7 is the highest rung on this ladder, which is a global catastrophe, in my words. And only Chernobyl and Fukushima Daiichi have reached the 7th rung on this scale. But as a colleague, John LaForge with NukeWatch in Wisconsin, put it back at the time, 2.5 years ago, well, there were 3 meltdowns and 4 explosions at Fukushima Daiichi. So isn't that at least a 3 times 7 or a 21 on this scale? So this latest leak of 300 tons of highly radioactive water into the soil, flowing now with the groundwater towards the ocean, you know, they call it a 3, but, you know, the ocean is just getting hammered at Fukushima.
Is this a logarithmic scale, the way the Richter scale is?
Yes, it is. Each rung on the ladder is 10 times more serious.
Interesting clip there, Kevin Camps. I want to ask Aaron, if you're still on the line, if you have any comments on the destruction to the sea life, Aaron, if you've done any research on that.
Well, I did a little bit. Like I say, I can personally only take little doses of this information myself. It's just so horrifying. I saw a story. This gentleman who makes a trip from Australia to California every few years in his sailboat, and he said this time when he went, just recently, there were no birds, no seabirds eating the fish, no fish. They saw, the only live fish they saw was a whale with a tumor on his head. And they said they saw this fishing boat just going back and forth by this reef and just sucking what little life was left out. And a little speedboat came up to him, and this gentleman said that, you know, they were kind of afraid because there was only 2 people on the boat, and they don't have a gun. They thought, oh, they're going to come and rob us. We're going to be out of our boat. But they came with fish. They were from that fishing boat. And they said, hey, you know, we got some fish here. We can't eat all this, and we're not going to take it. We're only after tuna or whatever they were after. And they said, well, thanks, but there's no way we can eat all this. And they said, well, that's okay. Just throw it whatever over the edge that you don't want. So they're taking all the life and just, you know, sucking it and killing it. And this guy was just horrified. And he had to have someone in front of the boat because there was so much debris smacking into the boat. They thought they were going to get a leak, you know, from all the debris floating around. And when he got into up near the waters, closer to Japan, the paint on the boat started to fade. It had never faded before. So a very, very sad and frightful message from someone who actually took that trip himself. He's taken it before, and like you said, there was no birds, no fish. It was just desolate.
Wow, now that is amazing. When the boat gets close to Japan, the paint starts to fade off the side. In the chat room, Nathaniel Mallow says, we want proof because we as a people on this planet have been ruled by the trust me belief for way too long. And then he also states, yes, because of the dishonesty in the media, proof has seemingly become a double-edged sword. And RD-47 says the USS Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier is covered in radiation and is sitting docked without a crew in San Diego. It sailed through the Fukushima radiation cloud. Yeah, I have something on that, actually, in my notes here, RD. James, do you have any comments on some of the things we've just been discussing?
Well, there are 50 crew members from that ship that have come down with cancer. There are 75 more that have been fully tested yet, but that have symptoms, that are sick. So you can imagine what's going on in the ocean.
Man. The USS Ronald Reagan and its sister ship, USS Essex, worked the rescue effort near the Fukushima nuclear power problem during the Japanese tsunami in 2011. Many of the sailors on the ship are diagnosed of leukemia, brain tumors, testicular cancer. They claim it was caused by contaminated water or the radiation plume that they went through. A new group action will be filed against Tokyo Electric Power Company based on allegations. They delayed releasing confirmation of the meltdown. New York Post reports Navy sailor Lindsay Cooper knew something was wrong when billows of metallic-tasting snow began drifting over the USS Ronald Reagan. She and scores of crewmates watched a sudden storm blow toward them from the tsunami-torn coast of Fukushima, Japan. The snow was caused by the freezing Pacific air mixing with a plume of radioactive steam. Senior Chief Michael Seaborn, a radiation decontamination officer, was assigned to test the aircraft carrier for radiation. The levels were incredibly dangerous, and at one point the radiation in the air measured 300 times higher than that which was considered safe. This is incredible. Any thoughts, James?
And it's all understated. They have detected high radiation ratings in the United States, not just in California. But like I said, they don't take, most of these readings are atmospheric. They're done by private individuals who have, the type of detectors that can't read the full range of radiation. So I just sent off for one. I just bought one that is a little bit more capable than what most of these people have. And it has software, and you can put your data in your computer and compile charts and so forth, which I'm going to do and share on my Facebook wall. But that's what it takes, because the government, no health organization and a science institution is sharing anything. I'm sure they're compiling it for their studies so that they'll have papers to write, peer review later on, But that's not helping us, is it?
No, it certainly isn't helping things, and I appreciate RD-47 bringing up the issue of the USS Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
That is a very important thing to think about. I do have another clip here. Kevin Camps, again, talking about some of the radiation levels coming out of Fukushima.
So going from 1 to 2 isn't doubling it, it's increasing it tenfold, and going from 2 to 3 is increasing it 100-fold from the 1, tenfold.
Yeah, and the Nuclear Regulation Authority has admitted, a 100-fold increase in the seriousness.
Why has this not been called a 7?
Well, the 7 might be if another earthquake hits the site, and they have something like 262 of these giant tanks, the same design, the same size as the one that just leaked.
So let's just recap this. Out of these 262 tanks, one of them just leaked. Just leaked, what, yesterday, last week? How big is the tank? Where's the tank?
In the last day or two, they've admitted to this latest leak, and it's 300 tons of highly radioactive water. It's giving off a dose rate of 10 rem per hour, and the way they discovered the leak were puddles on the ground giving off 10 rem per hour. You could get a worker dose, which is a high thing, within 5 hours, and you could get a fatal dose just standing next to a 5 rem puddle, after a certain amount of time.
Wow. And a rem, of course, is 1,000. I mean, there's 1,000 Is it 1,000 millirems or a million millirems in a rem?
1,000 millirem make 1 rem, and workers
and a million
internationally are limited to 2 rem per year.
Wow.
Members of the public to a mere 100 millirem per year under normal circumstances. So this thing is giving off 5 rem per hour, I think is the figure.
So that's pretty much the level of radioactivity that the core material itself would have.
Sorry, I misspoke. 10 rem per hour from this puddle of water on the ground. No, if you get into the core material, I mean, you're talking just unimaginable dose rates. You're talking, I don't even know if it's millions of rems per hour. But that's an instant. If you were to get close to the cores without radiation shielding, you would be dead within a second from gamma radiation.
Well, I've been a little encouraged by today because we definitely have had some interest, and I want to thank the folks that called in, RD47, Aaron, Eve, of course, James, Horak, Wanda, Judith, and all the folks in the chat room, Nathaniel Mallow, Truth, and WHP777, as well as our anonymous people that are in the chat room. Maybe there is some interest. I've got a few more days off here. Maybe I can continue to do some more of these roundtable discussions. James, we've only got a few minutes left in the show. I just wanted to give you a chance to kind of summarize things and even tell people there's a lot of interest buzzing in the chat room here about your information on the EMVs. So let's hear this.
Well, I'm very fond of pointing to them because they're there, and, NASA can't hide them anymore. They've hidden them for many years because they were the sole provider of the images, but now they're shared simultaneously with other space agencies, and some of these space agencies are not so inclined to lie and deceive and censor. So for the first time, for the last 3 years, we've been getting honest images, so more or less, and we've even seen structures related to the sun, like what I've been calling the solar anvil. And this is all good because waking people up to how things work through nature and answering some of these questions that science avoids, like how can a star continue to burn for billions of years? I mean, that defies the principle of the conservation of energy a little bit, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That's so true. Do you have any closing thoughts on Fukushima, James?
Agreed. It can be an extinction event. You're going to need help, and you may have to make some changes to get that help, but it'll be worth it.
Indeed. Well, I also want RD47 if you could post your link again in the chat room that you did your film for the moon, because I want to watch it after the show. I want to thank again James for taking the time to talk to us this afternoon. RD47, Aaron, Eve, Wanda, Judith, and all the folks in the chat room again. I'll continue to try to do these roundtables on Fukushima. Maybe we can stir some public interest and eventually maybe bubble that up to the government and try to get something done about this. You've been listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Marc Snider. Have a good afternoon, and bye-bye.